Right. So I'm going to start us off, Soflang. Firstly, thank you so incredibly much for joining us on this really chilly, really weird Wednesday. It's wonderful to have you all here with us. My name is Anine, and I am here as the humble host to our incredible senior engineer, Mandla. I'm going to hand over to him today. We will be taking questions throughout the session today. So if you have a question, pop it in the chat. If you'd like to speak up, just raise your hand and we can unmute you and we can go from there. But we will be sharing this on our YouTube channel as always. And we hope that you enjoy the session and that you learn something with us today. Mandla is always dabbling with something interesting and always the first person I think of when I think of interesting and modern programming languages. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Mandla. As people roll in, we'll admit them. And if your team need a link, let me know. All right. Thanks so much, Mandla. It's great to have you.
Awesome. Good afternoon, everyone. And thank you, Anin, for that introduction. Today, I am going to be focusing on not a new language, but tried and trusted Java. And if you guys have questions, as Anin said, just shout, and then Anin will just disturb me, and then I'll answer as I go. The talk today is modern programming tools. Optional are they containers? I wanted to actually call this, maybe it's a container. I actually sent in the wrong topic. And the maybe it's a container was a shout out to this being maybe is what Haskell calls their optional. And optional in Java is based off Haskell and Scala. So I was like, okay, this is going to be like a homage to Haskell. And then a container was like, it's a container because it's a functor. And then I thought, I don't want to be talking about functors and I don't want to be talking about maybes in Haskell and Scala. So what I actually want is I want to figure out how to explain optional. So this was at a client that we're at right now. I was anticipating getting a whole lot of new joiners. So it's something that we use a lot. So it's not just optional. There's a few other concepts that we use. And this was kind of a way for me to learn how to explain it. So again, if you have questions, this helps me because it helps me improve how I explain this. What you're going to see throughout this talk, this one is going to be code heavy. You're going to see a lot of real scenarios. So this is code as I was preparing. So over the last month, as I was working through our code base, anytime I find something interesting or cool, I would like make a note of it. And these are some of the ones that I like. There is a whole lot of other things that are related to optional that are there. That I won't touch on, but these are just the cool ones. And they sort of help explain some of the way that I think it helps with working with optional. So this is not going to be from the ground up explanation of optional. This is sort of assuming you've seen optional and maybe you haven't explored it as much as I've had the opportunity to explore it over the last year or so while I was at the client. Before I move on, I just want to give a shout out to Sahi. He sacrificed our parent session this morning to allow me to do some final touches on this presentation. Shout out to Sahi, thank you so much for that. And jumping into it. So the first way that you can think of optional is as a null marker. This is probably the most common way that people will talk about optional. And this is because there's a problem with null. Now, Tony Hoare famously called it the $1 billion mistake. It has been a bad idea to have null in sort of, I think he did it in Algol. There's interestingly another Tony Hoare, another person whose surname is Hoare, who created the awesome language Rust, who's currently working on the language Swift on Apple, which is interesting. But another thing with nulls is if you're a programmer, you've probably experienced a problem that's related to null or null-like things. So if you're in JavaScript, you might have had like an undefined exception or error that occurs in your code. If you're in Python, you might have seen something like none None is like you're trying to call a function on none and then you get an exception like that. In languages such as C++, Java, you get like null pointer exceptions. So it is a common sort of problem that every programmer probably has encountered a null pointer exception or a variation of that based on whatever language you're working on. The other problem I have with null is that it is vague. It is so broad because anything can be null. So if anything can be null, it means you as the developer or I as the developer, I have to go and figure out every place where I might be using null, where things are I know that that can be null, and I have to remember that, okay, I need to handle that now. Otherwise, I risk having a null pointer exception and then being called at like 2 in the morning to go fix a production bug. That's not fun. So a solution for this, is basically add some friction to your code and let your tools help you. This is one solution. And what I mean by that is this is an example of how it would look. So in this example, we have, we want to get a contact name. We want to use it to shout at them. So we want to like uppercase that and use it in a function that shouts. So to uppercase, we want to shout at this contact. But when you're looking at this example here, this looks like trivial. Like obviously you're going to see that this is now, so this is going to be an issue. But imagine this is like in two different parts of your code base. You have like your service or your DAO or repository or whatever, and then you have your view on the other side. And you now want to use this contact function, and you clearly have a problem there where there's a null that's being returned. And a null will be returned anytime you try to get something from a database or something. There is always that possibility that the ID that you might be using might not exist. So you're always going to have that null risk. And this can be handled in different ways. I am showing the ones which is using optional, so that when you do that get name there, you don't get a null pointer exception on line 11 when you try to do that uppercase contact to uppercase, so that you can again yell at your contact. So a way that you do this, one way to do this, which is the add friction to your code, is you just append optional to the return type of the function. So what you're communicating there to any developer that would be seeing this is this function may or may not return a result. So you may or may not get a contact. So you've now added, compared to the null version, now you have like this extra optional stuff there that you have to add on. But it is, I'm proposing that this is going to be useful because once you've added that and also added like the optional at that point there, when you do, you then have to also, this is adding more of that friction, by the way. When you do this get down here, when you do the get at the bottom here, you now have a way for the compiler to tell you. So not your compiler, your IDE can now remind you, oh, Mandla, you said that when you get a contact, the contact may or may not be there, but you didn't check whether or not that contact is there. So you didn't call is present first. So this is actually from Stack Overflow. There's literally a question if you're using SonarQube to sort of try and help you with that. Give me a sec. Can you guys still see my
We have lost your slides. Maybe just turn off your camera and then we can reload the slides. It might be a bandwidth restriction.
Okay, I'm gonna do that in a sec. 3.
No worries. It wouldn't be a session of the Forge if we didn't have at least one technical gremlin. It's literally part of the course.
Okay. Let's go here. I need to reshare the screen. So let's go to 5.
Amazing. It's all the fun.
I'm just
So
gonna do
maybe as a
this.
start, I know we're chatting around Java, but potentially would this pertain to some of our guys that are using different languages as well, just from a principal perspective?
Yes, so all of this is applicable to multiple different languages. So if you're working, C Sharp is the one that I couldn't find anything on. So C Sharp has different ways of dealing with with null pointer exceptions. But from different languages, you get, so in Rust, they call it option. In Python, they've started, I can't remember what Python does, but in Rust, they have option. In Scala, they have option. In Haskell, like I said, they have maybe. So this is, it is something that is, there we go. It is something that is becoming more common
Hmm.
in sort of the industry to have
Yeah.
option, because now it's such a pain to deal with. It's such a common error.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Let's
Yeah.
see. Oh, hey, Tanki-san. Yeah,
Two,
fantastic.
then 8, and
Hmm.
then I'm gonna share again. Let me know when you can see it, please.
Cool. Resharing. Okay, I can see. Guys, can you just give us a thumbs up if you can see these slides, just so that we're sure you're okay? Okay, cool. We're ready. There you go, Mandla.
Sorry about that. Okay, let me just get back to Avaka. Um, so null is your null pointer exception. It looks like it's more work, but that is kind of the point. The point is to give you a bit more to do so that you remember to check. And it also allows your tools to help you with, if you forget to do your null checks. It will just tell you, you said you're going to do a null check over here, but you haven't done it. And then you have your error there.
Mandla, before we go
Yeah.
on, I'm still seeing just the front slide that says modern programming tools. Do you maybe want to just move up for us? I think, okay.
You should be seeing, apparently you shouldn't do this.
Yes, got you.
Okay, cool. Not sure why that happened. So you shouldn't do this if you're in Java. So again, I'm going to be focusing a lot on Java because that is what I'm using daily, but there is similar ideas in other languages as well. The .NET one, I couldn't find anything on. They have nullables, and they have other things. .NET is weird. Um, Jason can fight me on this, but it is weird. So a second way to think about nullable, this is one that I came up with as I was talking to Joseph, who just joined our team, is as a more dense bool. And what I mean by that is, if you have a Boolean, so let's say you have a user, and on that user, you want to, that a user can be an employee. So the if a user is an employee, you want to ask that question. If a user is an employee, they should also have an employee number. So you can write this kind of code and it would work. But what happens if I forget the employee number? So I've said that I construct this user is an employee, but I forget to set this number over here. So this is another place where null can help you, because optional can help you. You can combine this two lines into this one line, and you can answer the same question. If an employee has an employee number, then if a user has an employee number, they are an employee. If they don't have an employee number, they're not an employee. Now you are in a situation where you can't forget to set an employee number if the user is an employee. This is now a redundancy check to increase the quality of your code. This, interestingly, is one of the principles that I like, which is make incorrect states impossible to represent. If you've ever heard of errors like, I saw somebody else's balance because there was an issue with the system that I was using, and it allowed me to see somebody else's balance. You want to make situations like that, you should never be able to see somebody else's balance. And this is an employee, you should only send certain information, such as like test information to employees. This tries to make sure that that state, like if it's an incorrect state, this makes sure that the incorrect state of having an employee who doesn't have an employee number would never be represented in this kind of code. There's a nice talk by Richard Feldman that he gave at the conference in 2016, where he goes deeper into this concept of making incorrect states impossible to represent. I highly recommend watching it. It helps with sort of the quality of your code. Moving on, another way to think of optional is it introduces a different programming paradigm. So again, another example of this is if you have sort of a view. So at the client I'm at, we have sort of a custom domain-specific language that we use to do our front end. It's based in Java. So you have over here on line 10, like a renderer, which you say, I'm going to return a body, and then we have a custom user details view. So this is just showing the details of the user. So I want to be able to say, if the user is present, I want to user details that get that user, and then just display that. IntelliJ will complain at this because, as I said in the previous slide, if you do it .get like this, IntelliJ will be like, you said you want to check before you use this user details because it is optional. Up here, you said you want me to remind you to recall that is present. IntelliJ is not intelligent enough to figure out that I've called is present, yeah, so it will complain. Which is what you kind of want, and you have to add an exception to your linters or whatever. But this is now a service that you, this is your view, and then the view gets its details from the currently logged in user. It gets it from the service. The service is defined down here, and all it does is just calls the repository to say, get me the details for the particular user ID that I just gave you. And that also returns an optional, and then that goes into the user repository. And this whole example is getting more complicated because then it goes back to the user view. And I think we should just forget about the programming paradigm for now. This is what in the writing business they call foreshadowing. But let's move on. So this was part of the original title, which is optional is a container. So consider this. Again, this is an example that we actively work on. You have a wizard being a form that has multiple steps. So in this case, this form has 2 steps. Step 1, you have to enter your name, and then when you click submit, you get to step 2, which is where you enter other details. Doesn't matter what the details are. What you then have to do is say, if a person clicks back when they're on step 2 and they click the back button, if they've entered information here, that information needs to show up again. So you start off on step 1, you enter it's a trap. If you go back to step 1, it needs to still have the value it's a trap in there. So the way we implement this is we use, so we've got our wizard class, and in this case, to simplify things, we only focusing on the name. So I'm just calling it a network name. And what we want to do is, if the person goes forward and comes back, we first want to check, was the name set? So we have a wizard cache over here. We go into the wizard cache, and then we say, did we previously set the name, the network name in the wizard cache? If we did, that's awesome. We show the input with the name shown as a string. If we don't have that name in the cache, that means the person didn't enter it before. It's the first time they're reaching that page. So we have to get that name from their user defaults. So we call a different service called user defaults, and then we say, give us the logged in user's network name. If the user has previously set their default name, then we can call the input and show the name in the input as the default value. But if they haven't, we can set a default value. So this is what optional allows you to do, name.empty. And then once we've set name.empty as a default value, we can then finally call input. And this, we know that it will work because of the way that optional works. So what optional allows you to do is you can have you can chain these as well. So you can say, get it from one place. If that one is empty, get it from a different place. If that one is empty, get it from a different place. You can chain this as many times as you want until you can say, okay, if you've exhausted all the different places where this thing can come from, just set a default value. This is a name here is a value object that we have all these value objects in our code. So with this, you can do this using nulls, so you can check like nullable things. It will lead to slightly more code than this, more lines of code than this, and then you can give it a try. Yes, Annie?
Yeah, so I see Karina, one of our guests, has asked, I'm wondering if optional in Java would be the same thing as the question mark in TypeScript when using the setting type. What do you think?
It allows you to do a similar thing. I'm going to show it now, actually. That's a good question. It allows you to do I think it's the question mark and the colon. I can't remember the syntax in TypeScript. I haven't touched TypeScript in a while, but it does allow you to do a similar thing. So consider this case over here. So what you have is you have a session. So this is answering your question. It was very well timed. Thank you. You have a session, and then in that session, you have an optional logged in user. So a user inside your session, you may or may not have a user who's logged in. And then within that logged in user, that user may or may not be an employee. And then that employee has to have communication details. That's what, and then a communication detail can either be a primary communication detail, say an email, an SMS, or a cell phone number, or it can be a secondary one. So we want to get the primary communication communication detail so that we can notify them of a production bug. For example, let's say this is a hypothetical example. This is one way to implement. I forgot what it's called in Java in TypeScript. Please remind me, Annie.
Pardon, let me just quickly check. Sorry, I'm just helping one of the guys out. What's up? I see we lost someone.
The previous question, what was it
Yes,
again?
so I'm wondering if optional in Java would be the same thing as using the question mark in TypeScript when using the setting type.
Yes. Okay. So
Wonderful.
The question mark, this would be a similar pattern to what you would have in TypeScript using the question mark. So I have this. So going back to this picture, optional, they may or may not be a logged in user. The logged in user may or may not be an employee, and they have to have communication details. So I want to be able to get the details, but I don't want to throw a null pointer exception if either of these two is null. That's what the question mark operator in JavaScript allows you, in TypeScript allows you to do. So in Java, a similar way to do it is you just say from the session. So what I want to do again, I just want to send a notification to the communication details that the person has. In this case, I'm busy testing, so I'm just sending hello world. The first thing I do is I try to get the logged in user. This is going to return to me an optional. Again, if you're looking at this picture over here, it returns me an optional logged in user. So on that optional logged in user, I then say, get me the logged in, I say .map, and then I say, get me the employee details. Once I've got the employee details, this is going to give me the employee details. I then get the communication details from there, and then I get the primary communication details. If any of these fail, so if any of these are null, I say just return empty communication details. This is something that you would have to model yourself. We have similar models to this in our code base. It's not exactly this nice, but it's close enough. So if we're saying if any of these, if either of these two is null, I want you to just return to me an empty. That's what this code is supposed to do for you. It doesn't actually do it. What you actually have to write is this flat map thing. For those who might be curious, flat map is what makes me think that optional is a functor. If you have more questions on what a functor is, please ask me afterwards. I'm not going to go into detail on it, but flat map is the function that you actually want to call. And if you say flat map, this is because you have to use flat map because you have an optional and optional. So you'd have, it basically combines two optionals into one. That's kind of the summary of flat map. And then what this will do essentially what the question mark operator, all of this here becomes what the question mark operator in JavaScript does. And I think .NET also has a similar question mark colon operator in their world. So this is how you would get it in Java using optional. And this is much cleaner because you don't have a lot of code, so you can focus. Because cleanliness of code is subjective, objective, depends on the person. I think this is much cleaner because it allows you to focus on what is actually going on. Looking at this, if you squint, you can say, I'm going to get the logged in user, and then from the logged in user, I'm going to get their details. From those details, I'm going to get the communication details, and then I'm going to get the primary information. This might also be different syntax. If you haven't seen it, this is how you call a static function on a class. So if you have a class called logged in user, and it has a static function called get details that takes in one argument, which is of type logged in user, you can just call it like this. I can't remember when this syntax was introduced into Java. But this is another sort of advantage, another nice pattern that, again, it's not just Java. It can be used in multiple other languages. This is just one way to do it. And it's cleaner, it's easier to read, it's focused. And basically, yeah, optional is a flat mappable. Again, foreshadowing. But unfortunately, that is the end of this talk. There is two other talks. I've done the one now, which is on optional. But as I said, what I want to do is there is not just the optional concept that I'm learning to explain. There is also lists, which the next talk is going to be about, which is moving beyond loops. And then the one after that is going to be with Jason on records of immutability. We might have some C# in that one. But are there any questions?
I'm looking at the chat. I see Jason has given us some responses as well. I do want to ask, you mentioned that you guys saw this in your production code as well. How did you come across this? Because it's really interesting.
So this is how we try to write our code. It is part of so we wrote some of that production code. But as we arrived at the client, we were introduced to a concept of don't use stringly typed Java, write strongly typed Java, which naturally leads to sort of this modeling. So when you're creating your models, try to communicate what you're doing. So if we're looking at sort of this example over here, what you're saying is you want to communicate to the developer who's reading your code that this may or may not be there. So that when they look, if they're used to saying optional, they immediately know that, okay, I need to do some extra steps to make sure that if I try to show this, it may or may not be there. So I need to do something special for it. So in this case, we just choose to hide it, but you could get it from somewhere else or try other things. So it's just a way to sort of increase, it was a way for us to increase the quality of our code and also have cleaner code, if I can say that.
Absolutely. And actually, that's a great segue into my next question. You made a comment around clean code, which obviously is something that we all aspire to. We've all read the book, we all drank the Kool-Aid. why do you say that it is now subjective and not necessarily an objective thing? Just to open that can
Um,
of worms.
so that is mostly, this is a continuous, I don't want to say argument, because if I say argument, it sounds like we fight and we're arguing with each other. But in the team, we like to talk about sort of like naming things and how easy it is to read this versus reading if statements, which is, it's it depends on the user. I'm confused by subjective and objective, but it depends on the user because
Mm,
I'm used to this, so this to me looks clean. But if you are not used to this, if you're not used to seeing optional and seeing optional off, this may look complicated and not clean to you. So that it depends on the user based on that.
mm,
Um, and
yeah.
also like the naming conventions, such as should this be called user defaults or should it be called the user default service? We were talking about this with Jason just yesterday, and it's a continuing argument on how to name things as well.
So, do you guys decide as a team to work on a certain paradigm? And is that then documented, or what is the best practice that you guys are doing right now?
So what we do in our team, we try. We experiment a lot. That's the one thing. Our current experiment, let me say the previous experiment that we had, we would have code critiques or design reviews, and then in the design review is when we would look at sort of these kind of patterns and decide whether or not they're helpful, easy to read, and something that we should continue doing. And if it's not, we then we use a tech debt wall,
Mm,
which allows us to prioritize which tech debt to take on. So from that, we can then decide, okay, this is important and it's easy to do, so we need to pull it into the sprint and then just quickly fix it. So we haven't really done it a lot because we've had like some major production things that we had to do, and
mm,
our technical stuff has sort of fallen away. But we try to, that's how we decide. And then we would then, in our pull requests, since everybody on the team now knows, we document it.
mm,
One of the ways we tried to document it was to put it directly in the code.
yeah.
We found that we were not really using that system. It was left um, unmaintained. So what we're trying out now is putting it on a wiki page where we then document our ways of work and we document our
Mm.
dev standards.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it really feeds into the concept of us needing to have, meaningful names and proper functions and proper boundaries and really
Yes.
just considering what it looks like. But it's a valid point to consider the admin that goes into maintaining these sorts of things. So we've got
Yes.
a fair group of our graduates in today's session. So I'd love to know if you have any advice on using this for our new grads and maybe some resources that they could go dabble in. For everyone, not just the grads.
Um, so for using this, I would say, so for me right now, it's a bit of a hammer. I try to use it a lot. Anytime I see a pattern where it's like, oh, there's so many if statements that are related to now, I will just try to spend an extra 5 minutes just trying to rewrite it as optional and then give up and then go back to the now code. But at least I would have learned something. So I just try to use your tools. So your IDE, whether it's Vim or all these other ones, IntelliJ Code, VS Code, they have auto completion. So if you just go dot, it can show you all the available functions. Just have a read through as to what functions are available and if whether or
Mhm.
not it's useful for the current problem that you're solving. The way I learn, I like that practical experience. For learning about optional itself, I'll add a link. There is a nice tutorial on the Oracle website that goes into a lot of detail. I actually noticed that their example on flat map. When I first did the flat map example, I forgot that I had to do flat map. I just did map. And then when I looked at the Oracle one, I noticed that they did a similar example to me. And they mentioned that don't forget that you need to use flat map. So there is the Oracle um, There is for optional specifically, there is the Oracle tutorial. There's also a nice YouTube tutorial by one of the guys who's working on the Java compiler, on the Java language itself. I don't know if he's still working on it. I can share both of those. And then also just looking at talks like this. This is for like the general principle of making impossible states impossible to represent. So I can send those two other ones. I don't actually have them in the talk, but this one is in the slides, which I'm going to upload to my GitLab later today.
Oh, that would be amazing if you could share that. It's such a great way for us to learn and to grow. I see Jason has commented, Evans. He says, would you say that this would be enforced more through a per developer basis, or would a health PR culture be needed within the team to be a better approach?
I think a healthy PR culture helps because with this kind of thing, you need the whole team to sort of understand what's going on. And if it's per developer, if you have one developer who really knows how to use optional, but the rest of the team sort of doesn't, it becomes a problem with maintenance when that developer goes on leave. But if it's on a PR level, you know that, okay, the code works, but it's us sort of improving. So it's more not just the PR, but the whole process around how do you ensure that the quality of your code is maintained. So having those code reviews or code critiques beyond PR. On a PR, you're looking at specifically the problem that the person is solving, but having something like a design review or a code critique allows you to have a look at the broader project itself. Are we still moving as quickly as we can? Where can we improve on our velocity? What can we do on the code to help us move quicker? So I would look at it having it's the process itself that the whole team, I think, would need to enforce. And then it also helps if somebody new joins, if it's already at the team level, the team culture would then help with that sort of onboarding. This is not how we do that here.
Absolutely. Actually, thank you so much for bringing that up, because it does bring me to a question, obviously, that I have from a talent perspective. I know it's something you guys have been implementing, is this culture of code critiques. How frequently are you doing them? What is sort of the format? Because obviously this does give you that nice PR culture and helps you to deliver.
Yeah. So with code critiques, we wanted to do them weekly. But they sort of fall away once you start getting a lot of work, which is unfortunate. But we initially had set them for like every 2 weeks, just before like our demo, demo to business, just to say, okay, what can we improve on our code, and then also inviting like our architects to also get their input on what's happening in the broader environment and how it affects us. So it would be like bi-weekly, and then on a daily basis, you've got your PRs where you're looking at like the specific implementations, and then the code critique again is that broader look at the code base.
Yeah, I think it always comes down to this holistic view of, yes, we use the technology to solve the problems, but we also need to create room for growth for ourselves. So if there are any further questions, guys, feel free to leave them in the comments. This is a slightly shorter session, but it is, like Mandla said, the first of 3 different sessions that we will be having around these topics. And please keep an eye out for them. I must say thank you so much, Mandla. It has been nothing but a pleasure having you on. And I must admit, looking at all of this, it is absolutely astonishing the amount of research that's there. I see Tsepo has a question. Tsepo, do you want to unmute, or do you want to just pop it in the chat for us? We still have a little bit of time. All right. So as I mentioned earlier, the session is recorded. It will be on our Dariel YouTube channel in a little bit. No worries, Tsepo, we've all been there. I do that constantly, so don't worry about the wrong button. But thank you again, Mandla. This was really interesting. I can't wait to see the next one. And Sasha, thank you so much for adding in your code comments. I must honestly start using a naming convention called blah blah when I do things, or like using it to explain things. So thank you again, everyone. You will definitely see us very, very soon. And otherwise, have a beautiful rest of your afternoon. And we will definitely be together next time. See you then. Bye.
Bye.